China is one of the few countries which can trace its existence back over 2 millennia to 221 BC.
And China will lose the US market, which, as I've said, is 15%.
We don't care. We don't care. China has been here for 5,000 years.
So which one is correct? Is China 2,200 years old, or is China more than 5,000 years old? I will attempt to answer this question in as concise and as short a time as possible. A lot of details and nuances will have to be omitted, so feel free to chip in the comments. Let's deal with the 2,200-year-old claim. Now, this is quite undisputed. The reason is the name China itself is an exonym referring to the land of Qin, whose ruler, Ying Zheng, also known as Qin Shi Huang, unified the broken feudal states of the previous dynasty into one kingdom with a centralized bureaucracy. Now, it is important to note that even though the unified Qin dynasty lasted only 15 years from proclamation to collapse, Chinese historiography places very heavy emphasis on this period due to the overarching changes in political landscape of China. And most academicians would agree that the centralized bureaucracy put in place by Qin forms the political foundation with which China is to be governed until the collapse of the Qing dynasty in the early 20th century. In my opinion, however, this continuity actually lasted until today. The current Chinese Communist Party is structurally more similar to Qin than Qin is to its predecessor, the Zhou. As such, I am of the opinion that modern China is rather a radical repackaging of the 2 millennia of Chinese statecraft with a sprinkling of Marxist and Western influence, rather than a complete change of political structure. So, China is 2,200 years old? Not quite. Now, to draw a line between Qin and its predecessor, the Zhou, would be similar to saying that Russia is only 34 years old, which is politically and culturally absurd. In the case of Qin, it would even be more absurd because the ideologies and political philosophies that spur on the success of Qin itself was developed during a period called the Spring and Autumn period under the Zhou dynasty. This period is also known as the 100 School of Thoughts because every political philosophy governing China would emerge in this period. Confucianism, Mohism, legalism, Taoism were some of the more well-known products of this age, and every successive Chinese government to this very day uses differing ratio of mixture between these philosophies, including the current Chinese government. Socialism with Chinese characteristics refer to this amalgam of philosophies. So, ignoring the differences of political structure, China would be as old as the Zhou dynasty, I presume? Well, that would be 3,000 years old. Now, we are entering rather opaque territory here. Much depends on whether one takes into account the importance of political philosophy and cultural continuity in evaluating the age of China. I don't want this video to turn into a video thesis, so I will only concentrate on one factor to argue that China as a concept has its roots further back than 3,000 years old. That factor is Confucianism. Now, no one would question that Confucian philosophy is foundational in Chinese family values. But slightly more contentious would be the indirect influence that Confucianism has on how Chinese society construct their political system. I am of the opinion that Confucianism is very much at work in the background, and its operations explains a lot of features of Chinese bureaucracy and political system. But for time limitation, I will concentrate on the major thematic difference between Confucian philosophy versus Western constitutional ideologies. And this major thematic difference is the emphasis of Confucianism on morality and propriety instead of Western emphasis on law and rights. Now, why this emphasis on morality, on propriety? Could Confucius be correct when he reminisces an earlier period when rulers ruled with morality and propriety forged with a strict observance of ritualistic correspondence? Or was Confucius merely reminiscing a past that never existed? There are clues from modern archaeology and historiography that suggests that Confucius may not be overly modest when he says he wasn't teaching anything new, but rather reviving how rulers used to behave. And it has a lot to do with how the Zhou got into power by toppling the Shang before them. You see, the Shang, who ruled between 3,700 to 3,000 years ago, was a technologically and socially advanced Bronze Age organization, surrounded by more primitive and less organized pre-Bronze Age societies. From deciphered oracle bones inscription, we know that the Shang developed an ethno-supremistic ideology with a state religion centered on making human sacrifice to appease their easily angered supreme heaven or godhead. I have made videos on this for those interested to know more about the Shang. I will attach the thumbnail here. You can go and search in my profile. But suffice it to say here that Shang people are rarely used as sacrificial goods. The majority of the people that are sacrificed were prisoners of war taken from surrounding tribes. In fact, an economy developed where Asian tribes of Shang sent human sacrifices on schedule to the Shang dynasty. One such Asian tribe would eventually work with the victim tribes and rebel against the Shang to found, yes, you guessed it, the Zhou dynasty. This emphasis of Zhou King on morality and propriety was no coincidence, you see. A group of people gaining power by rebelling against tyranny, a tyranny that they themselves were complicit in, would naturally worry about their legitimacy to rule. This is why the early Zhou kings ruled with emphasis on morality and propriety, doing away with state religion and developed the concept of mandate of heaven, a theme that continued to influence modern Chinese political system to this very day. Confucius' emphasis on morality and propriety harks back to the early Zhou kings, and his avoidance on questions of spirituality and metaphysics in his philosophy is a direct product of this environment. Long story short, the Chinese political consciousness is continuous and at the very least 2,200 years old. But if taken holistically, it easily dates back to the collapse of the Shang, which is around 3,000 years ago. As for 5,000 years, now that is a story for another day.